flawlessly elegant fiancée, Helen Arndt, on his arm. But what they didn't see was the ghost that haunted him, the memory of a woman he'd discarded like a failed business venture. He thought he had buried that part of his past. But on a Tuesday morning, in a small, unassuming coffee shop, his past came crashing back. He saw her, his ex-wife, Shawnee, looking fragile and tired. And then she collapsed. She was pregnant. In that single, heart-stopping moment, Heath Mitchell's meticulously constructed world began to shatter. The scent of roasted coffee beans and steamed milk was the backdrop to Heath Mitchell's perfectly ordered Tuesday. He was closing a multi-million-dollar merger, and this meeting at the Daily Grind, a neutral, unpretentious location, was a power move. It showed he was grounded, one of the people, even as he was about to financially consume the man sitting opposite him. His fiancée, Helen Arndt, sat beside him, a portrait of serene support. Her platinum ring caught the light, a silent testament to the empire they were building together. "The final terms are non-negotiable, Robert," Heath said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that left no room for argument. Helen placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "Darling, perhaps a touch more finesse," she murmured, her smile never reaching her cool, assessing eyes. It was then that Heath's gaze drifted past Robert's paling face towards the line at the counter. And he saw her, Shawnee Wood. The name was a jolt, a forgotten file suddenly corrupted and reopened in his mind. It had been over a year since he'd had his lawyer deliver the papers, since he'd decided she was incompatible with the trajectory of his life. Shawnee, with her messy artist's bun, her paint-splattered jeans, and her laughter that was too loud for boardrooms and charity galas. She didn't fit the brand. Helen did, but this wasn't the Shawnee he remembered. The vibrant spark in her eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. Her clothes, a simple cotton dress and worn-out sandals, seemed to hang on a frame that was both fuller and more fragile. She was leaning heavily against the counter, one hand pressed to the small of her back, the other resting protectively over a pronounced, undeniable baby bump. Pregnant. The word detonated in Heath's mind with silent, concussive force. The hum of the coffee shop faded to a distant roar. Robert was still talking, something about shareholder value, but his words were meaningless noise. Pregnant. He did a swift, ruthless calculation. They had been separated for 14 months. The timing was impossible. It couldn't be his. A wave of something cold and sharp, like relief but uglier, washed over him. It was immediately followed by a pang of something else. Something he couldn't name. Helen followed his gaze. Her perfectly sculpted lips tightened into a razor-thin line. "Good heavens," she whispered, her voice laced with a delicate, dismissive disgust. "Some people have no shame." Heath didn't answer. He was watching Shawnee sway. He saw the color drain from her face, her knuckles turn white as she gripped the counter. Her eyes, which had once looked at him with such unadulterated love, fluttered closed. Then she fell. It wasn't a dramatic, theatrical collapse. It was a quiet, boneless crumpling, a puppet whose strings had been cut. A collective gasp rippled through the coffee shop. A ceramic mug slipped from her grasp and shattered on the tiled floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. For one frozen second, Heath was paralyzed. The CEO, the titan of industry, was just a man watching his past implode. His protocol-driven brain screamed at him, "This is not your problem. You have a meeting. This is a scene. Avoid it." But his body betrayed him. He was on his feet before he'd even made a conscious decision, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Heath, what are you doing?" Helen's voice was a sharp hiss. "Sit down. You'll cause a scene." He ignored her. He moved through the crowd of stunned onlookers, his vision tunneling until the only thing he could see was Shawnee, lying amidst the shards of the broken mug. Someone was calling 911. A barista was kneeling beside her, looking panicked. Heath knelt down, his expensive suit trousers crunching on the ceramic fragments. "Shawnee," he said, his voice hoarse. He reached out a hand, then hesitated, hovering it over her shoulder. She was so pale. Her freckles, which he used to trace with his finger, stood out like scattered constellations on her skin. He gently touched her arm. Her skin was clammy. "Shawnee, can you hear me?" Her eyelids flickered. She moaned softly, a sound of pure distress that cut through him deeper than any corporate negotiation ever could. Her hand moved weakly, instinctively to her stomach. "My baby," she whispered, her voice a thread of sound. "Is my baby?" The word struck him with the force of a physical blow. The abstract concept of her pregnancy suddenly became terrifyingly real. A life was in jeopardy. "An ambulance is on its way," he said, forcing a tone of command into his voice, the one he used to calm panicked investors. "You're going to be okay." He looked up and saw Helen standing at the edge of the small crowd that had formed. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated fury. It wasn't concern for him or for Shawnee. It was the look of a queen whose meticulously planned coronation had just been gate-crashed by a peasant. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw a cold, hard ultimatum. But Heath couldn't look away from the woman on the floor. The woman he had once promised to love and protect. The woman he had systematically erased from his life because she was an inconvenience. And as the distant wail of a siren grew closer, a terrifying thought began to form, a question that his logical mind had already dismissed, but his gut refused to let go of. He pushed it down, focusing on the immediate crisis. But it lingered, a poison seeping into the foundations of his new, perfect life. What if the math was wrong? The antiseptic smell of the hospital was an assault on Heath's senses. It was a world away from the curated scents of leather, mahogany, and Helen's expensive perfume that defined his life. Here, the currency wasn't money or power. It was measured in beeping machines and hushed, serious conversations. He stood in the hallway outside Shawnee's room, having used his name and a tone that suggested dire consequences for non-compliance to get information from the ER staff. Dehydration, low blood sugar, exhaustion. The baby, the doctor had assured him with a professionally detached air, appeared to be fine for now, but they were keeping her for observation. Helen had refused to come. "I will not be part of this circus, Heath," she had said, her voice like chipping ice as he helped the paramedics get Shawnee onto the gurney. "You are the CEO of Mitchell Holdings. You have a reputation. Being seen publicly fawning over your destitute ex-wife is not part of the brand. Send your assistant. Send money. But you need to extract yourself. Immediately." He had simply looked at her, truly looked at her, and seen the cold calculation where compassion should have been. "Get a car home, Helen," was all he'd said before climbing into the back of the ambulance, a decision that felt both insane and unavoidable. Now, leaning against the sterile white wall, the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a hollow, unsettling guilt. He remembered their last conversation. It hadn't been a conversation. It had been a verdict, delivered by him in his glass-walled office. "It's just not working, Shawnee," he had said, straightening a stack of papers that didn't need straightening. He couldn't look at her. "Our lives are on different paths." "Paths? Heath, we built the path together," she had pleaded, her voice trembling. She'd been wearing the yellow sundress he loved, the one she wore on their first date. I was with you when you had nothing but a business plan on a napkin. Don't do this. That was then, he'd said, the words cold and rehearsed. I need a partner who understands the demands of my world. Someone who fits. It's a pragmatic decision. Pragmatic. He had used that word to sever a marriage, to slice a person out of his heart. He'd convinced himself it was necessary. Ambition required sacrifice. But seeing her on the floor of that coffee shop, so utterly vulnerable, the pragmatism felt like brutality. He pushed off the wall and walked into her room. Shawnee was awake, propped up against a thin hospital pillow. An IV tube was taped to her arm. The color had returned to her cheeks, but her eyes were guarded. The warmth he remembered now shielded by a wall of mistrust. "What are you doing here, Heath?" she asked, her voice flat. "I was there. I saw you fall," he said, stopping near the foot of the bed. The space between them felt like a canyon. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." "Well, you've seen. I'm okay. You can go back to your fiancé and your merger." Each word was a carefully aimed dart. He flinched. "Shawnee, He didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," felt laughably inadequate. "The doctors said you need to rest. You've been overworking yourself." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "And how would I avoid that? My part-time job at the gallery doesn't exactly pay for a life of leisure. Some of us don't have assistants to run our errands." The jab landed. He had built an empire, yet she was struggling to the point of collapse. The power imbalance between them was no longer just emotional, it was a chasm. He had everything. She had been left with the rubble of their shared past. "Let me help," he said, the words coming out more like a command than an offer. It was his default setting. Identify a problem, throw money at it until it's solved. "I'll cover all your medical bills. I can set up a fund, get you a better apartment, a car, anything you need until the baby comes." Shawnee's eyes flashed with a fire he hadn't seen since their arguments in the early days, the ones fueled by passion, not bitterness. "No. No, Shawnee, be reasonable. This isn't about us. It's about your health, about the baby's health. My health and my baby's health are my responsibility," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I don't want your money, Heath. I learned a long time ago that your help always comes with strings. It comes with expectations. It comes with control. I'm not signing up for that again." He felt a surge of frustration. Why was she being so difficult? He was trying to do the right thing. "This isn't about control. It's about decency." "Decency?" she shot back, sitting up straighter. "Decency was a phone call from you, not a sterile letter from your lawyer. Decency was not finding out you were engaged by seeing it on the cover of a magazine. You don't get to show up now, a year later, and play the hero because your conscience is bothering you." Her words stripped away his defenses, leaving the raw nerve of his guilt exposed. She was right. He hadn't been decent. He'd been a coward. He took a step closer to the bed. "Who's the father, Shawnee?" he asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. Her expression hardened into a mask of stone. "That is absolutely none of your business. I saw you collapse. I'm paying the hospital bill whether you like it or not. I think that buys me the right to ask a simple question. You think your money buys you rights to my life? That's exactly what I'm talking about," she said, her voice rising. "This is the Heath I remember, the one who thinks everything and everyone has a price tag. Well, I'm not for sale, and neither is my child." He stared at her, at the fierce, protective set of her jaw. The timing didn't make sense. He'd been meticulous about the separation. There had been no final, emotional night together. It had been a clean cut. So why did her refusal to answer feel like a stone in his gut? Why did the thought of her having a child with another man ignite a flicker of possessive, irrational anger? "Fine," he said, his voice clipped. He pulled a black credit card from his wallet and placed it on the bedside table. "The hospital has this on file for all expenses. My assistant will arrange a car to take you home when you're discharged. Don't be a fool, Shawnee. Use the help. Not for you, but for your baby." He turned and walked out before she could throw the card back at him. As he strode down the hallway, the echo of his expensive shoes on the linoleum floor sounded like a countdown. He had tried to solve the problem his way, with money and logistics, but her rejection, her accusation that he was still the same man, had shaken him. He had thought he was being pragmatic, strong. But what if she was right? What if he was just a man who put a price tag on everything, including the people he once claimed to love? He got into his waiting town car, the smell of its leather interior a familiar comfort. But for the first time, it felt like a cage. The annual Children's Literacy Foundation Gala was the glittering apex of the city's social calendar, and Heath Mitchell was its king. Tonight, he moved through the opulent ballroom of the St. Regis with the practiced ease of a monarch in his court. He smiled, he shook hands, he pledged a headline-grabbing donation that would ensure his company's name was on the front page of the society pages tomorrow. Helen was magnificent at his side. She wore a deep crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin, her blonde hair swept into an intricate chignon. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. She was the perfect corporate queen, steering him through conversations, her laughter light and musical, her hand a constant, proprietary weight on his arm. To the outside world, they were a portrait of power, success, and impenetrable unity. But inside Heath's bespoke tuxedo, a quiet dissonance was growing. The clinking of champagne glasses sounded like shattering glass. The forced smiles of the city's elite felt like masks. He kept seeing Shawnee's pale, exhausted face. "Darling, you seem distracted," Helen murmured, her voice a velvet whisper in his ear as they paused near a towering ice sculpture. "Is this about your little charity case from this morning?" The condescension in her tone was subtle, but it was there. "Her name is Shawnee, Helen. She's my ex-wife." "I'm aware," she said, taking a delicate sip of champagne. Her eyes scanned the room, dismissing everyone as she focused solely on him. "I hope you've handled it. A quiet settlement, I assume? It's the cleanest way. We don't want her turning up at your office, making a scene. A pregnant, scorned woman can be so unpredictable." Heath felt a muscle tighten in his jaw. "It's not a hostile takeover, Helen. It's a person." "Of course, darling. A person who conveniently fainted right in front of you. It's a classic move. Pathetic, really. She's clearly desperate and sees you as her lottery ticket. You must see that." He looked at her flawless makeup and her unwavering certainty. Did she really believe that? Or was it what she needed to believe? He remembered the fierce pride in Shawnee's eyes when she'd refused his money. That wasn't the act of a gold digger. It was the act of someone protecting what little she had left. "She didn't want my money," he said flatly. Helen's perfectly arched eyebrows rose. "Oh, she's smarter than I thought. The long game. Playing hard to get makes the final payout larger. Heath, you can't be this naive. You, who can read a balance sheet from a mile away. People like her, they see people like us as an opportunity. People like her. People like us." The chasm she created with those words was vast and absolute. And for the first time, Heath felt a sickening certainty that a year ago he would have agreed with her. He would have seen Shawnee's collapse as a calculated inconvenience, a problem to be managed and neutralized. The thought that he had become that person or had been that person all along, was chilling. Later, in the back of their chauffeured Maybach, the city lights sliding over them like liquid diamonds, Helen returned to the subject. "I had my father make a few inquiries," she said, casually examining her nails. Discreetly, of course. Heath turned to her, a cold knot forming in his stomach. "You did what?" "Don't be so dramatic. It's just due diligence. She lost her job at the art gallery a few months ago. Something about budget cuts. She's been living in a tiny apartment in a rather unsavory part of town, apparently picking up freelance illustration work that barely covers her rent. The father of the child is not on the scene. It's all very tragic and very messy." She finally looked at him, her gaze sharp. "A mess that we don't need attached to our name, Heath. Especially not now, with the merger and our engagement announcement." He felt a surge of white-hot anger. It was an invasion, a cold, clinical dissection of a life he had helped shatter. "You had no right to do that, Helen." "I have every right," she countered, her voice losing its velvet edge and taking on the hardness of steel. "Your past is my future. Any loose ends are a threat to what we are building. I am protecting us. I am protecting you from your own sentimentality." "Sentimentality? It's called being a decent human being. Decency is a luxury we can't always afford," she retorted. "Success isn't built on decency, Heath. You know that. It's built on ruthless choices. You made one when you left her. Don't let a moment of weakness undermine the best decision you ever made." They rode the rest of the way in a tense, vibrating silence. The best decision he ever made. Was it? He had traded chaotic, paint-splattered love for sterile, strategic partnership. He had traded loud laughter for polite, calculated smiles. He had thought it was a necessary upgrade, an evolution. When they arrived at his penthouse, their penthouse, the space felt cavernous and cold. The floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the glittering city skyline like a conquered kingdom. He had everything he had ever wanted. He was standing at the summit. So why did he feel so empty? He walked to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. He thought about Shawnee in her tiny, unsavory apartment, alone and pregnant, fighting to keep her dignity while he stood here, surrounded by meaningless opulence. Helen came up behind him, her arms sliding around his waist, her cheek pressing against his back. "Don't think about her anymore," she whispered, her voice once again soft and persuasive. "She's the past. I'm your future. We are inevitable." He didn't answer. He just stared out at the city lights, the whiskey burning a path down his throat. Helen was wrong. Shawnee wasn't just the past. Her collapse had been like a crack in the foundation of his carefully constructed life. And now he was beginning to see that the entire structure was built on lies he had told himself. And he had a sinking feeling that it was all about to come crashing down. Sleep offered Heath no escape. His dreams were a chaotic montage of memories. Shawnee laughing as they painted their first apartment, her hands covered in sky-blue paint, the cold, dismissive look on Helen's face at the coffee shop, the shattering of the ceramic mug, over and over again. He woke before dawn, the sheets tangled around him, with a profound sense of unease. Helen's words echoed in his mind. Success is built on ruthless choices. He had made the ruthless choice. He had cut Shawnee out of his life cleanly and efficiently. But Helen's casual investigation, her description of Shawnee's struggles, had planted a seed of doubt that was now growing into a thick, thorny vine. Something felt wrong. The narrative he had constructed about their breakup, that they had simply grown apart, that she couldn't keep up, felt thin, flimsy. He went to his home office, the sky outside his window just beginning to bleed from black to a soft, bruised purple. He bypassed his usual routine of market analysis and emails. Instead, he found himself searching for an old, encrypted hard drive. It contained his life before Mitchell Holdings became an empire, before Helen. His life with Shawnee. He scrolled through old photos. Shawnee, beaming, holding up the keys to their first tiny office space. The two of them, exhausted but happy, after pulling an all-nighter to finish a proposal. Her, asleep on his chest, a book splayed open on the pillow beside her. In every image, she was the vibrant, supportive center of his world. When had that changed? When had he started seeing her as an obstacle instead of a partner? He tried to pinpoint the moment. It seemed to begin around the time he met Helen at a networking event. Helen's father was a legendary figure in finance, and she had moved through those circles with an inherited, effortless grace. She had seen Heath's raw ambition and potential, and she had begun to subtly mentor him, shaping him, polishing his rough edges. She had been the one to point out Shawnee's flaws. A CEO's wife is an asset, Heath. Her image is a reflection of the company. That dress? It's charming for an art fair. But for the investors' dinner? She's so emotional. You need someone with a cooler head, someone who doesn't get flustered when you have to work late. Did you hear what she said to Mrs. Vandergrift about corporate tax loopholes? Darling, some opinions are best kept private. He had absorbed it all, letting Helen's sophisticated worldview poison his perception of the woman he loved. He started to see Shawnee through Helen's eyes, as unsophisticated, emotionally volatile, a liability. The final straw had been an email he had thought he'd deleted forever. After an hour of searching, he found it in a deep archive folder. It was from a new, important investor he had been courting, sent the day after a small, intimate dinner party at their home. Subject: regarding our discussion. Mr. Mitchell, it was a pleasure to dine with you and your wife last night. However, I must admit I have some reservations. During a private conversation, your wife expressed some rather radical views on wealth distribution and corporate responsibility. More concerningly, she spoke of your own ambitions as being dangerously all-consuming, and voiced fears about the ethical corners you might be cutting to achieve your goals. While I admire your drive, I cannot, in good conscience, invest in a company whose own leadership's foundation appears to have such cracks. I'm afraid I will be rescinding my offer of investment. Sincerely, Marcus Thorne. That email had been the confirmation he needed. It was proof that Shawnee was not just incompatible with his world, but actively sabotaging it. He had confronted her, furious. She had denied it vehemently, her eyes wide with shock and hurt. Heath, I would never say that. I was bragging about you. I told him how proud I was of your integrity. He must have misunderstood me. He hadn't believed her. In his mind, it was the final piece of evidence. He had chosen the investor, the company, the future Helen had laid out for him, over his wife. He had told her it was over that same week. He never did hear from Marcus Thorne again. Now, looking at the email with fresh eyes, a cold dread crept up his spine. The language. It was a little too formal, a little too perfectly damning. Shawnee could be blunt, but she wasn't eloquent in her criticism in that way. And Marcus Thorne had seemed so enthusiastic before that dinner. Why would one conversation change everything so drastically? Heath made a decision. He wasn't a man who liked unanswered questions. He picked up his phone, not calling his assistant or his driver, but a number he hadn't used in years. "Frank," he said when the gruff voice answered. "It's Heath Mitchell." Frank Donovan was a private investigator, a former detective who was discreet, expensive, and ruthlessly effective. He had done some opposition research for Heath during a particularly nasty, hostile takeover attempt a few years back. Mitchell, long time. What swamp needs draining? It's a personal matter, Frank. I need you to find someone. A man named Marcus Thorne. He was a potential investor about 18 months ago, and I need you to look into my ex-wife's life for the past year. Not her, specifically. I want to know about her job loss, the circumstances around it. I want to know who her friends are, who she's been talking to. Spying on the ex? That's usually a messy business, Heath. I'm not spying on her, Heath corrected, his voice sharp. I'm investigating the past. I have a feeling I've been operating on bad information. Be discreet. No one can know about this, especially not my fiancé. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Got it, Frank said. When things get this complicated, it usually means there's a woman involved. Looks like you've got two. Heath hung up the phone, the investigator's words ringing in his ears. He looked at the old photo on his screen, of him and Shawnee, young and hopeful. He had believed he was making a rational, pragmatic choice. But what if it wasn't a choice at all? What if he had been manipulated? What if the woman he was about to marry, the architect of his new life, had built it all on a foundation of lies, with Shawnee's heartbreak as the first stone? The possibility was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it had to be true. 3 days after the incident at the coffee shop, Heath found himself parked across the street from a run-down, 3-story brick apartment building. This was where Shawnee lived. Helen's words, an unsavory part of town, were an exaggeration born of privilege, but it was a world away from the gleaming steel and glass towers he inhabited. There were kids playing on the sidewalk, the sound of their laughter mixing with the distant city traffic. It was a neighborhood with life, not just address numbers. He wasn't here to offer money again. Shawnee's rejection had been a necessary shock to his system. He'd spent the last 2 days in a fugue state, going through the motions of his life while his mind replayed the past, scrutinizing every memory, every conversation, through a new lens of suspicion. He was here because he couldn't stay away. He needed to see her, to gauge for himself if she was truly okay. Instead of his driver, he had driven himself in one of his less conspicuous cars. Instead of a business suit, he wore jeans and a simple grey sweater. He got out of the car carrying 2 large paper grocery bags. It was a clumsy, uncertain gesture. What did pregnant women need? He'd had his assistant's assistant, a young woman who was a new mother, make a list. The bags were filled with organic vegetables, lean proteins, prenatal vitamins, and a carton of the ridiculously expensive ice cream Shawnee used to love. It still felt like throwing money at the problem, but at least it was tangible. It was food, not a fund. He found her apartment on the 2nd floor. When he knocked, the silence on the other side was so long he thought she wasn't going to answer. Finally, the door opened a crack, held by a security chain. Her face appeared in the gap, her expression wary. "Heath, what are you doing here?" "I brought supplies," he said, holding up the grocery bags. "I was worried you weren't eating properly." She stared at the bags, then at his face. He could see the internal battle in her eyes, the pride warring with the exhaustion. "I told you I don't want your charity." "It's not charity, it's groceries," he said, feeling foolish. "Just let me put them in your kitchen, then I'll leave, I promise." She hesitated for another long moment, then sighed and unlatched the chain. She opened the door and stepped back to let him in, wrapping a worn cardigan tighter around herself. Her apartment was tiny, but it was immaculately clean and filled with her personality. Canvases were stacked against one wall, some finished, some blank. Books were piled on every available surface. The small space smelled of turpentine, and lavender. It was more of a home than his sprawling, minimalist penthouse had ever been. He walked into the small kitchen area and began unpacking the groceries. The silence was thick with unspoken history. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice soft. She was leaning against the doorframe, watching him, her arms crossed over her stomach. "I know." He put the milk in the fridge, which was mostly empty. The sight sent another pang of guilt through him. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, but the doctor said everything is fine. Thank you for being there, at the coffee shop, and for the hospital." The admission seemed to cost her. "Of course," he said quietly. They stood in silence for another minute. He was acutely aware of every detail: the chipped paint on the windowsill, a framed photo on the wall of her with two smiling women he didn't recognize, the gentle curve of her belly under the cardigan. "Shawnee," he began, turning to face her. "About the father. I was out of line to ask. It's none of my business." She looked surprised by the apology. She nodded slowly. "No, it isn't. He had to try one more time, but differently. I just want to understand. The timing. It doesn't add up. I know it's not mine. I just can't figure out." She cut him off, a weary look on her face. "Heath, please, just drop it." But something in her eyes, a flicker of pain, of something hidden, made him push. "I'm not trying to cause problems. I just need to know. After I ended things, I thought you would—" "What? Fall apart?" she finished for him, a bitter edge to her voice. "I did. For a while. And then I had to pull myself together. I met someone. It was a rebound, a mistake, a mess. He was gone before I even knew I was pregnant." "There. Is that the story you wanted?" The words were delivered like a rehearsed speech, a little too quickly, a little too cleanly. It didn't feel right, but her expression was one of finality, a clear, "Do not push further" sign. So he let it go. For now. He finished putting the last of the groceries away. "Well, I should go." "Heath," she said as he reached the door. He turned. "Why are you really here? It's not just about groceries, is it?" He leaned against the door, the truth of his turmoil rising to the surface. "I've been thinking about the breakup, about everything that happened before it." She tensed. "There's no point in rehashing that." "I think there is," he said, his voice low and serious. "I think I was wrong. Not just about how I ended it, but about why. I let people influence me. I listened to the wrong voices." He didn't say Helen's name, but they both knew who he meant. Shawnee looked down, wrapping her arms around herself again. "It doesn't matter anymore. What's done is done. It matters to me," he insisted. "Shawnee, the email. From Marcus Thorne, the investor. The one that said you'd bad-mouthed me." Her head snapped up, her eyes flashing with the memory of that old, deep wound. "I told you, Heath. I never said those things." "I know," he said softly. "I believe you now." For the first time since he'd arrived, the wall between them seemed to crack. She stared at him, her expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and a pain so profound it made his chest ache. To have the one person you love believe you are a traitor. He had done that to her. And he had been wrong. "Why?" she whispered. "Why now?" "Because seeing you on that floor," he said, his voice raw with an honesty he hadn't accessed in years, "woke me up. I've been asleep for a very long time." He left then, walking out into the late afternoon sun. He hadn't fixed anything. He hadn't been forgiven. But a fragile truce had been declared. He had planted a seed of truth, and in doing so had confirmed his own terrifying suspicion. The foundation of his life wasn't just cracked, it was rotten, and he knew, with chilling certainty that he had to tear it all down, no matter the cost. Frank Donovan worked out of a cluttered office above a laundromat that always smelled faintly of bleach and regret. He was a relic from a bygone era, a man who believed in legwork and intuition over algorithms, and he was worth every penny. 2 weeks after their phone call, Frank summoned Heath to his office. The meeting was a stark contrast to Heath's usual environment. There were no leather chairs or panoramic city views, just 2 mismatched coffee mugs, an overflowing ashtray, and a manila folder that Frank dropped onto his desk with a thud. "You were right to be suspicious, Mitchell," Frank said, leaning back in his creaky chair. "Your life has been curated." Heath's heart hammered against his ribs. He reached for the folder, but Frank held up a hand. "Let's start with the easy part. Your ex-wife, Shawnee Wood." He pulled out a few sheets of paper. "Got laid off from the Miller Contemporary Art Gallery 10 months ago. The official reason was budget cuts. The gallery was indeed in financial trouble." Frank paused, taking a sip of his murky coffee. However, a week before the layoffs were announced, the gallery received a very generous anonymous donation. $100,000. Enough to keep them afloat for another year and then some. But this donation came with a very specific, verbal-only stipulation, conveyed through a lawyer. The donation was conditional on the immediate termination of one Shawnee Wood. Heath felt the air leave his lungs. "What? Who was the donor?" "Took some digging. The money was routed through 3 different shell corporations and a charitable trust. But I'm good at what I do. The trust is managed by Aunt Global, your fiancé's family company. The final authorization for the transfer came from an account controlled by one Helen Arndt." Heath stared at the detective, his mind refusing to process the information. Helen had engineered Shawnee's job loss. She had systematically stripped away her stability, her income, her passion, all while pretending to be his supportive partner. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. "That's not all," Frank continued, his voice grim. He pushed the folder towards Heath. "Now for Marcus Thorne." Heath opened the folder. The first page was a professional headshot of a smiling, silver-haired man. Marcus Thorne. The next few pages were a summary of Frank's findings. Thorne had indeed been a legitimate, high-value investor. He had been incredibly enthusiastic about Mitchell Holdings. Frank had found him living in a retirement community in Arizona, playing golf 3 times a week. "I paid him a visit," Frank said. "Nice guy, sharp as a tack. He remembers you, remembers the dinner party, remembers your ex-wife very well. Said she was a delightful spitfire." His words. Said she spent the whole night talking you up, telling him how you were going to change the world. He was completely sold. "Then what about the email?" Heath asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "He sent me an email rescinding his offer. He said she'd called me a monster." Frank shook his head slowly. "He never sent any such email, Heath. He has no idea what you're talking about. His investment didn't fall through because of your wife. It fell through because the day after the dinner, he got a call from a competitor of yours, a company called Sterling Price, with an offer that was, and I quote, "too damn good to refuse." He said the offer was so aggressive, it was almost like they knew his exact financial position and what buttons to push. He always thought it was a strange coincidence. Heath's mind was racing, connecting the dots. "Sterling Price, Helen's father has a stake in their parent company. A controlling stake," Frank corrected. "And the email? The one you got, purportedly from Thorne? I had a tech guy I know analyze the header data from the copy you sent me. It didn't originate from Thorne's servers. It was spoofed, sent from a private, encrypted network, the same network that Helen Arndt uses for her personal and business communications." The folder slipped from Heath's numb fingers. It was all there. A meticulous, cold-blooded campaign of sabotage. Helen hadn't just nudged him away from Shawnee. She had built the bomb, lit the fuse, and then stood beside him, comforting him in the aftermath of the explosion she herself had caused. She had made him believe Shawnee was a threat, a liability, a saboteur, when all along the saboteur was sleeping in his bed. Every memory of the past 18 months was now tainted. Every piece of advice from Helen, every whispered word of support, was a lie. She hadn't been polishing him for success. She had been isolating him, making him dependent on her, ensuring he had no one to turn to but her. She hadn't just wanted to be his partner, she had wanted to own him. A new, more terrifying thought surfaced. "Frank," Heath said, his voice shaking with a cold fury. "The rebound, the father of Shawnee's baby. She said he was a mistake, that he disappeared. I want you to find him." Frank looked at him with something akin to pity. "Already did, kid. That was the first thing I checked." He slid a final piece of paper across the desk. It was a copy of a page from a calendar. Shawnee's calendar, from her old work computer. Most of the days were filled with appointments and deadlines. But one evening, 14 months ago, the night after Heath had ended their marriage, was circled in red. On it were 3 words. "Heath, one last time." Heath stared at the words, his vision blurring. He remembered that night. He had gone back to their old apartment to get the last of his things. She was there, devastated, broken. He had been cold, distant, trying to maintain the clean cut. But she had begged him, not for a reconciliation, but for one last night, to say goodbye properly. He had been weak. He had told himself it was closure. They had made love, a desperate, heartbreaking farewell that he had ruthlessly buried in his memory, convincing himself it never happened because it didn't fit the narrative of his pragmatic decision. He had walked out the next morning without looking back, leaving her in the ruins of their life together. 9 months later, their child would have been born. But Shawnee was 7 months pregnant now. He looked at Frank, his face ashen. "The dates. She's 7 months pregnant." Frank nodded grimly. "The baby's premature. Or more likely, the pregnancy has been extremely difficult. Stress, malnutrition. They can slow down development. The doctors at the hospital would have told her that. She's probably been terrified this whole time. The baby was his child. He had left his pregnant wife, the mother of his child, to fend for herself after his fiancé had systematically destroyed her life. And Shawnee, in a desperate act of self-preservation, had tried to protect her child from him, from the man who had abandoned her, from the woman who had targeted her, from the toxic world they both inhabited. The entire monstrous truth crashed down upon him. He wasn't just a fool who had been manipulated. He was a willing accomplice. His ambition, his pride, his refusal to see what was right in front of him had made him Helen's perfect tool. He stood up, the chair scraping back violently. The curated world he had built was gone. In its place was a wasteland of lies, and somewhere in that wasteland was his son or daughter, fighting for a healthy start in a world he had helped make hostile. "Thank you, Frank," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Send me the bill." He walked out of the office and into the harsh afternoon light, a man hollowed out and remade by the truth. There was no more confusion, no more doubt. There was only a cold, crystalline certainty about what he had to do next. It wasn't about redemption. It was about retribution. Helen Arndt believed in control. She controlled her diet, her social schedule, her public image, and most importantly, she controlled Heath. Or so she thought. In the 2 weeks since Shawnee's collapse, she had felt that control slipping, like a handful of fine sand. Heath was distant, distracted. He was polite, attentive even, but there was a new opacity to his eyes, a wall she couldn't seem to penetrate. She attributed it to the stress of the merger and lingering, misguided guilt over his ex-wife. Her solution, as always, was to eliminate the problem. She decided it was time to deal with Shawnee Wood directly, woman to woman. A display of power, a final warning shot to make the little artist retreat back into the woodwork where she belonged. She found Shawnee not at her apartment, but at a small community garden, tucked between two old buildings. Shawnee was sitting on a wooden bench, sketching in a notepad, a small, peaceful smile on her face. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling her in soft light. She looked content. The sight infuriated Helen. "I was wondering where a person like you might hide," Helen said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the garden. She was dressed in a sharp, white pantsuit, looking utterly alien in the rustic setting. Shawnee's head snapped up. The peaceful expression vanished, replaced by a guarded tension. She closed her sketchbook, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. "Helen, what do you want?" "I want to offer you a way out," Helen said, stopping a few feet from the bench, her posture radiating disdain. A final, generous offer. Let's call it a severance package from Heath's life. Shawnee's eyes narrowed. "I've already told Heath I don't want his money." "Oh, this isn't his money. This is mine," Helen said, pulling a long, elegant envelope from her designer handbag. "And it's not an offer, it's a solution. For everyone. Inside this envelope is a cashier's check for $250,000. More money than you've ever seen in your life, I'm sure." She placed the envelope on the bench, a deliberate distance from Shawnee. "You take it, you sign a simple, non-disclosure agreement, and you disappear. Move to another state. Start a new life. Raise your baby. Somewhere no one knows you. It's the best thing for it, really, to not be born into scandal." Shawnee stared at the envelope, then back at Helen, a look of disbelief on her face. "You are unbelievable. You think you can just buy me off?" "I'm being pragmatic," Helen said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You are a loose end, a complication Heath is too sentimental to deal with properly. I, however, am not. He's feeling guilty right now, and you're taking advantage of that. But it will pass. His guilt will fade, and you will be left with nothing. Again. I'm offering you a secure future." A small, humorless laugh escaped Shawnee's lips. "A secure future? You mean the one you took from me? The job at the gallery? Did you really think I wouldn't find out about your anonymous donation?" Helen's smile didn't falter, but her eyes went cold. "I have no idea what you're talking about, don't you?" Shawnee stood up, her movement slow but steady. For the first time, she didn't look fragile. She looked angry. "You've been pulling the strings all along, haven't you? Whispering in his ear, twisting things, making him see me as some kind of liability. All so you could have him, his name, his money." "I did it to protect him," Helen snapped, her composure finally cracking. The mask of serene superiority slipped, revealing the raw, vicious insecurity beneath. "From you. You were holding him back. You with your messy, emotional, small-minded world. He was destined for greatness, and you were an anchor weighing him down. I didn't steal him. I liberated him." "You manipulated him," Shawnee corrected, her voice low and steady. "You lied to him. You built your entire relationship on a foundation of deceit. It's called strategy," Helen sneered. "A concept you wouldn't understand. I won. He's with me. We are getting married. You are nothing but a ghost, a pathetic little secret. And now you show up pregnant, trying to ruin everything. Do you really think he'd ever choose you and your bastard child over me? Over this life? The word bastard hung in the air, ugly and venomous. Shawnee flinched as if struck. This child, Shawnee said, her voice trembling with a protective fury that seemed to make her stronger, is more real than anything you have ever had. And you're right about one thing. Heath made his choice. He chose a life of cold, empty ambition with a cold, empty woman. And he will have to live with that. Shawnee picked up her sketchbook and turned to leave. You're making a huge mistake, Helen called after her, her voice shrill. You have no idea what I'm capable of. I can make your life a living hell. I can make sure you never work in this city again. I can bury you. Shawnee stopped but didn't turn around. You've already tried, she said over her shoulder. And I'm still standing. She walked away, leaving Helen standing alone in the garden, the fat envelope lying on the bench like a shed snake skin. Helen's face was a mask of pure rage. The little artist was supposed to be broken, desperate. She was supposed to crawl and accept the scraps from her table. But she had fought back. Unseen, from the driver's seat of a nondescript sedan parked down the street, Heath Mitchell watched the entire exchange. He had followed Helen, a sick feeling in his gut telling him she would do something like this. He couldn't hear their words, but he saw it all in their body language. Helen's arrogant posturing, Shawnee's defiant strength, the envelope placed on the bench. But what he saw next made his blood run cold. As Shawnee walked away, she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out her cell phone. She pressed a button on the screen, her expression grim but resolved. She had been recording. Heath felt a surge of adrenaline, a strange mix of horror at Helen's venom and fierce, protective pride in Shawnee. She wasn't a victim waiting to be rescued. She was a fighter. She had been gathering her own ammunition. He watched Helen snatch the envelope from the bench, her movements jerky with fury, and storm back to her car. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the beginning of the end. Helen had overplayed her hand, and she had just shown her true face to the one person who now had the power to destroy her. The mask hadn't just slipped. Shawnee had ripped it clean off, and he was on his way to make sure Helen could never put it on again. The penthouse, once a symbol of Heath's success, now felt like a mausoleum. The sprawling views of the city seemed to mock him, a glittering testament to a kingdom built on lies. He sat in the dark, the damning folder from Frank Donovan on the glass coffee table in front of him, and waited. When Helen arrived, she was radiating a triumphant energy. She swept into the room, dropping her handbag onto a chair. Well, that's settled, she announced, pouring herself a glass of chilled white wine. The little problem has been taken care of. She'll be gone by the end of the month. She was surprisingly stubborn, but everyone has a price. Heath didn't move. He just watched her from the shadows. What did you do, Helen? His voice was unnaturally calm, flat. She turned, a slight frown touching her perfect lips. Darling, what are you doing sitting in the dark? I did what had to be done. I made her an offer she couldn't refuse. She's irrelevant now. Show me the check, he said. Her frown deepened. What? The check, from the generous offer you made her. You still have it, don't you? She refused it. The color drained from Helen's face. She stared at him, her confident facade beginning to crumble. How did you know that? He stood up and switched on a single, low-wattage lamp, illuminating the folder on the table. I know everything, Helen. Her eyes darted to the folder, then back to his face. For the first time, he saw genuine fear in them. Heath, whatever she told you, it's a lie. She's a desperate, manipulative woman, trying to drive a wedge between us. Stop, he said, the single word carrying so much weight it seemed to shake the room. Just stop lying. I have the PI's report. I have the financial records of the anonymous donation. I have the analysis of the spoofed email from Marcus Thorne. I have the truth. She stared at him, speechless. The web of lies she had so carefully woven for nearly 2 years had been torn apart in an instant. You destroyed her career, he said, his voice a low, trembling testament to his rage. You fed me lies to turn me against her. You isolated me. You manipulated me into ending my marriage, all of it. It was all you. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a defiant hardness. The mask was gone, and the woman underneath was terrifying in her conviction. I did it for you, for us, she cried, her voice rising. Look at what we have. Look at this life. You would never have had this with her. She was a dead weight, and I cut you free. You call this freedom? He shot back, gesturing around the vast empty room. This is a cage, Helen. A beautiful gilded cage you built for me. You didn't do it for me. You did it for you. You saw me as a project, a property to be acquired. I saw you as a king who was settling for a life in a cottage, she screamed, abandoning all pretense of composure. I made you what you are. No, he said, shaking his head, a sickening clarity washing over him. You almost made me what you are, a hollow, ruthless person who sees human beings as assets and liabilities. The worst part is, I let you. I was so blinded by ambition, so eager to believe that love was a liability, that I became your willing accomplice. He paused, the confession tearing from his throat. She was pregnant, Helen, when I left her, and I was the father. Our final night together. It was the night after I broke her heart on your advice. And you knew, didn't you? You must have suspected. Helen's face was a pale, contorted mask of fury and jealousy. It doesn't matter. That child would have been another anchor, another distraction from what you were meant to achieve. The casual, callous dismissal of his own child was the final, unforgivable blow. He looked at this woman, this stranger he was supposed to marry, and felt nothing but a cold, vast emptiness. The love he thought he had for her, the respect, the partnership. It had all been an illusion, a reflection of what she wanted him to see. Get out, he said, his voice barely a whisper. What? She gasped, as if she couldn't comprehend the words. Get your things and get out of my life, he said, his voice gaining strength, each word a nail in the coffin of their shared future. The engagement is over. Our business partnership is over. Everything is over. A hysterical laugh escaped her. You can't be serious. You'll be ruined. My father will destroy you. The press, the scandal. You'll lose everything. I already did, he said, his gaze distant, filled with a regret so profound it was a physical weight. I lost everything that mattered 1.5 years ago. What I have now is just noise. And I'm ready for the silence. He walked to the door and opened it. Leave, Helen, before I call security. She stared at him, her eyes wild with disbelief and hatred. She saw that he meant it. The control was gone. The king had abdicated the throne she had built for him. With a choked sob of pure rage, she grabbed her handbag and stormed past him, brushing his shoulder with deliberate force. You will regret this, Heath Mitchell, she hissed. I will burn your empire to the ground. He watched her go, then slowly closed the door, the click of the lock echoing in the silent apartment. He didn't feel relief. He didn't feel victory. He felt hollowed out, scoured clean by the terrible truth. He had made his choice. He had chosen the uncertain, terrifying path of atonement over the comfortable, damning lie. He picked up his phone. He had one more call to make. He scrolled to Shawnee's name. As it began to ring, he looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. The millionaire the Titan, the king was gone. In his place was just a man, hoping it wasn't too late to beg for a forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. Heath didn't ask Shawnee to meet him at a fancy restaurant or his sterile office. He asked to see her at the community garden, the place she had chosen as her sanctuary. When he arrived, she was already there, sitting on the same bench, but this time she wasn't sketching. She was just watching the evening settle over the city, her hands resting on her stomach. He approached slowly, not as a CEO or a man of power, but as a supplicant. He wasn't carrying gifts or checks. He was carrying the heavy, ugly weight of the truth. He stopped in front of her, the manila folder clutched in his hand. "Shawnee," he began, his voice rough. "Thank you for seeing me." She looked up at him, her eyes clear and searching. She didn't say anything, just waited. "I know what Helen did," he said, the words falling out of him. All of it. The job at the gallery, the email from Marcus Thorne, the lies, the whispers, everything. He knelt down in front of her, a gesture of submission he hadn't made to anyone in his adult life. He opened the folder on the bench between them, revealing the evidence of Helen's treachery. "I am so sorry," he whispered, the apology a raw, inadequate sound. "I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I was so arrogant, so blinded by what I thought I wanted, that I couldn't see the truth right in front of me. I let her poison me against you, and in doing so, I broke the best thing in my life. I broke us." Shawnee looked at the papers, her expression unreadable. She traced a finger over a copy of the faked email, the source of so much pain. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly. "And I know about the baby," he continued, his voice cracking. "I know he's mine, or she. Frank, my investigator, he found your calendar. I remember that night, Shawnee. I tried to forget it, to pretend it didn't happen, because it didn't fit with my cold, pragmatic decision. But it was real, and I walked away." He finally looked her in the eyes, holding nothing back. "I left you, pregnant and alone, to face the fallout of a life that my fiancé had systematically destroyed. There are no words to describe the man that makes me. There are no excuses." He reached into his jacket and pulled out two things. The first was a thick legal document. "This is a confession," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not from Helen, from me. It's a sworn affidavit detailing my own negligence and complicity in Helen's actions against you. It details the emotional distress, the financial sabotage. It's a weapon, Shawnee. If you want to sue me, to take me for everything I have, this will make it easy. It's yours." He then placed a small, simple flip phone on top of the document. "And this is a phone. It has one number in it. A lawyer. One of the best, most ruthless litigators in the country. She works for you now. If Helen or her father try to come after you in any way, you call her. If the press harasses you, you call her. She's your shield. I've put $10 million in an independent trust to fund any and all of your legal needs, indefinitely. It's untouchable, by me or anyone else." He sat back on his heels, his confession and his atonement laid bare before her. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I don't deserve it, and I'm not asking for a second chance. I forfeited that right a long time ago. I'm giving you back the power, Shawnee, the power that Helen and I took from you. What you do with it is your choice. If you want me to disappear forever, I will. I will provide for our child through a blind trust, and you will never have to see or speak to me again." He paused, taking a deep, shaky breath. "But if you are willing, If there is any part of you that can stomach the sight of me, I want to be a father. Not a financier. A father. I want to be there for the birth. I want to change diapers. I want to tell our child stories and teach them how to ride a bike. I will do it on your terms. Whatever you say, whatever you need, I will do. That is my only request. Shawnee was silent for a long time, her gaze shifting from the documents to his face. The setting sun cast long shadows across the garden. He could see the years of pain, the betrayal, the lonely struggle, all churning in her eyes. He had prepared himself for her to tell him to leave, to take his documents and his guilt, and disappear. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet but strong. All I ever wanted, Heath, was for you to believe me. She pushed the affidavit back towards him. I don't want your money, and I don't want a lawsuit. I just want to be safe. I want my child to be safe. She picked up the small phone. This I will keep. She looked down at her stomach, then back at him, a deep, weary sigh escaping her. The baby. He kicks when he hears jazz music, and he gets hiccups when I eat spicy food. It was a peace offering, a tiny, fragile bridge across the canyon of their past. She was offering him a glimpse, a chance to know their child. Tears welled in Heath's eyes, hot and shameful. He hadn't cried in 20 years. A boy, he whispered. A boy, she confirmed. He needs a father, Heath, not a ghost, not a bank account, a father. Can you be that? Can you be the man I thought you were before all of this? I will spend the rest of my life trying, he promised, his voice thick with an emotion so powerful it felt like it could remake him from the inside out. He didn't try to touch her. He didn't push for more. He simply stayed there, kneeling before her and his unborn son, as dusk settled around them. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion. It was something far more fragile and more profound. It was the first day of his atonement. The weeks that followed were a study in tentative, fragile reconstruction. The public fallout from Heath's broken engagement was brutal, just as Helen had promised. Her father's conglomerates pulled their funding from Mitchell Holdings, and the media, fueled by Helen's carefully curated leaks, painted Heath as a volatile, heartless philanderer who had dumped the city's darling for his pregnant, low-class ex-wife. His company's stock plummeted. His board of directors called for emergency meetings. The old Heath would have waged war. He would have used his own arsenal of PR firms and legal threats to fight back, to control the narrative. The new Heath did something else entirely. He accepted it. At a press conference, looking tired but resolute, he refused to sling mud. He simply stated that the engagement was off due to irreconcilable personal differences, and that his focus was now on his family and his child. He took the hits, absorbing the financial and social blows as a form of penance. His real work was happening far from the boardrooms. It was happening in the cramped, sunlit space of Shawnee's apartment. He didn't try to move her into a bigger place. He knew she needed the stability of her own territory. Instead, he helped her make it ready. He spent a Saturday assembling a crib, the pictographic instructions more baffling than any corporate contract he'd ever read. He cursed, dropped screws, and pinched his fingers, while Shawnee sat on her sofa, laughing. It was the first time he'd heard her truly laugh in years, and the sound was worth more than his company's entire market cap. He attended a birthing class with her. He was clumsy and out of place among the other eager young couples. He fumbled with the breathing exercises and felt a flush of embarrassment when the instructor talked about epidurals. But he was there. He listened. He took notes. He watched Shawnee, saw the mix of fear and excitement in her eyes, and felt a fierce, primal wave of protectiveness that had nothing to do with money or power. They found a new, quiet rhythm. He would come over after his grueling days at the office, shed his suit jacket and tie, and they would eat dinner together at her small kitchen table. They didn't talk much about the past. Instead, they talked about the future in small, careful increments. Names for the baby, the color to paint the nursery nook, whether the child would inherit his stubbornness or her artistic talent. One evening, while he was rubbing her swollen feet, an act of service so intimate and humbling it felt more significant than any multi-million-dollar deal, she spoke about her fear. "I'm scared, Heath," she said, her voice soft. "I'm scared of doing this alone." "You're not alone," he said immediately, his hand stilling on her ankle. He looked up at her. "I know I have no right to say that. I made you alone. But I am here now, and I'm not leaving, no matter what." She searched his face, looking for the old Heath, the man of transactions and escape clauses. But he wasn't there anymore. He had been burned away by guilt and remade by a desperate need to be worthy of this second chance. "He kicked today," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Right after you left. I think he misses you when you're gone." The simple statement landed in his chest like a sunburst. He misses you. The idea that this tiny, unborn person already had a connection to him, a connection he had almost thrown away forever, was overwhelming. The call came in the middle of the night, 3 weeks before her due date. It was Shawnee, her voice tight with a mixture of pain and panic. "Heath, it's time!" He broke every speed limit getting to her apartment. He found her with her bag packed, leaning against the wall, breathing through a contraction. He didn't panic. He took her hand, his voice calm and steady, repeating the words the instructor had taught them. He guided her to the car, carried her bag, and drove them through the sleeping city to the hospital. In the sterile, bright delivery room, the world shrank to the space around Shawnee's bed. His empire, the stock market, Helen's war against him. It all faded into meaningless static. The only thing that mattered was the woman in front of him, her face beaded with sweat, her hand gripping his with a strength he didn't know she possessed. He was her anchor, her coach, her partner. He was whatever she needed him to be. After hours of intense, exhausting labor, a new sound filled the room, the powerful, raw cry of a newborn. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, placing the small, squirming baby onto Shawnee's chest. Shawnee was sobbing, tears of pain and exhaustion, and pure, unadulterated joy streaming down her face. Heath was crying too, silent tears tracking down his cheeks as he looked at his son. His son. He had a son. Shawnee looked at him, her eyes shining. "Do you want to hold him?" His hands trembled as he reached out. The nurse helped him take the baby, showing him how to support the tiny head. The baby was so small, so perfect. He had a dusting of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were a deep, familiar blue. Heath's eyes. He looked from his son to Shawnee, the mother of his child, the woman he had wronged so terribly. Her smile was tired but beautiful, a sunrise after a long, dark night. In that moment, holding his son, Heath Mitchell understood. Redemption wasn't a destination you arrived at. It wasn't a debt you paid off. It was a promise you made every single day to be a better man. And his new beginning was just starting. In the quiet of the hospital room, with his newborn son sleeping against his chest, Heath Mitchell finally understood the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't in the soaring stock prices or the skyline views from a penthouse. It was in the fierce, unconditional love for a child and the humbling grace of a second chance. His journey was far from over. Trust had to be rebuilt, one day at a time, and the wreckage of his past still needed to be cleared. But for the first time in years, his future wasn't a strategic acquisition. It was a blank canvas. He and Shawnee, bound not by a contract, but by the incredible tiny life they had created, would paint it together, with new colors of forgiveness, hope, and love. Their story is a powerful reminder that it's never too late to rewrite your own ending. What did you think of Heath's transformation? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. Share it with someone who loves a powerful redemption story. And don't forget to subscribe for more emotional real-life dramas.